Hello and welcome to the final project for ECI 517. My name's Dan Kelly. I want to walk you through my project, my paper. It's the flipped classroom instructional model towards a theoretical framework. And what I'm trying to do in this project and in this paper is to lay down kind of the base of what the flipped classroom is from a theoretical standpoint. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the flipped classroom, and I want to put those out there for others to comment on, to add to delete, whatever they choose to do with it. But there currently is a substantial lack of a theoretical framework for something that's being used in hundreds or thousands of classrooms across the country. And I want to walk you through kind of where the flipped classroom came from, and then kind of where it's going, and how we put theory over top of it. So the first thing I want to introduce you to is who are considered the founders of the flipped classroom, John Bergman and Aaron Sams, and their pictures up on the screen now. And John Bergman and Aaron Sams wrote a book, and the book is here. It's called Flip Your Classroom, Reach Every Student Every Day. And this is considered kind of the seminal text for a lot of people doing training and professional development on the flipped classroom. I have some issues with it that I will get into because I think an understanding of where the flipped classroom came from is very important to where it's going. Bergman and Sams, like I said, are often credited with how the flipped classroom came to be. They were two teachers who decided to try this model, and it worked, so they wrote a book, and they've made a lot of money off it. And when I first started studying the flipped classroom, in part for my thesis, I asked around, and I asked some instructional technologists who they would go to for research, and I was pointed to a woman named Kathy Arfstrom, and she runs the Flipped Learning Network, and she's published a bunch of papers, I was told, and they're all published on her website, and none of it's peer reviewed, and we're not really getting into, how this model works. So the real originator of the flipped classroom is not Aaron and Sams, or Bergman and Sams, I apologize. It is Wes Baker from Cedarville University in Ohio, and he's a journalist by trade, and a very nice guy, but his first attempt at flipping the classroom came in 1995, and I actually have the original sheet that he gave to his students, university students, on what the expectations were and what the flipped classroom really meant. So I've been in contact with Wes Baker, or Dr. Wes Baker, for quite some time, and he's a very good resource and a very modest man. Just says, hey, I did this kind of on a lark to see if it would work. So he's really the one who created the term, or coined the term, flipped classroom, and doesn't get any credit for it. So I feel it necessary to give him credit wherever I discuss this. And if you look through my paper, you'll see this long kind of history of the origin of the flipped classroom and what is out there in the literature. And the biggest problem with the literature is that it doesn't cover theoretical framework. It doesn't tell me what the flipped classroom is from a theory standpoint. It tells me that it's great. It tells me that it allows you to individualize instruction for each student. It allows you to not have a one-size-fits-all classroom. But as I started actually looking at how the flipped classroom was implemented, I found that similar to Khan Academy, where we're creating this new innovative environment where it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, we're creating videos to go online where the students passively watch these videos and they don't interact with anybody, and literally every student watches the same video. That's not differentiated or individualized instruction, however you want to frame it. That's a one-size-fits-all approach. The idea of the flipped classroom is that it allows you to spend more time with hands-on. Kind of the original was, oh, we're going to do homework in class. That didn't really catch on as a mantra, but now this active and learning environment inside the classroom is kind of the direction that the literature is going. There still is not a lot of peer review with respect to the implementation of the flipped classroom, and most of the things that are out there that are actually reviewed from a scholarly standpoint are just, here's what I did, here's how I implemented it, and this is what happened. The problem when you look at the methodology of all of those different papers and all of those different uses of the flipped classroom, there is not a consistent use of it, and the methodology is generally very, very flawed and doesn't give us a good overview of what's actually happening. Some of the studies that have come out, and my favorite quote is that the flipped classroom, as far as student outcomes, at best enhances student learning and at worst does no harm. So we're not seeing huge gains, if any gains, in student achievement. There may be other factors that are being improved, but their final grade, and when you compare that final grade to another class that is traditionally taught, there isn't any substantive or statistically significant differences. So what I wanted to do is develop a framework for research going forward, and that's what's on the screen now is the entire picture, but I'll break it down a little bit for you. The top part is the online component, which I'm terming as a behaviorist approach. I know that there's some differences in the literature, even stuff we've covered in this class, that is different than what I'm defining it as, but there's quite a bit of discussion surrounding whether behaviorist approaches are just didactic instruction or whether there is an active learning component on the part of the students. And I go into this in some detail in the paper, but really the paper is meant to lay out that there is not an established theoretical framework, and I'm just at the very beginnings of defining what that looks like, and this is my first attempt at doing so in kind of a scholarly sense. So if you look in the paper, I specifically talk about the student being a passive recipient, and I know that Burton Moore and Maglero, which we read in class, specifically discusses this as a misconception of behaviorist learning environments. However, it is in other literature considered to be, or the student is considered to be, the passive recipient, and the teacher is didactically instructing. I don't believe that to be the case, but that's what we're looking at here with the online video lecture. What I point out in the paper with respect to this is the Kirschner, Sweller, and Clark point out that there's a lack of teacher guidance in constructivist environments, and in this case, in the flipped classroom, in this behavioral component, there is no teacher guidance as far as the videos, unless the teacher has gone through the time, which I have yet to see, and include some sort of active component to those video lectures. The vast majority of them out there are just recorded videos, similar to what you're watching now. When we go down and we look at the constructivist component, which is the classroom component, this is where the active learning environment comes in. And I do disagree with the Kirschner paper that constructivist learning environments are kind of a laissez-faire, the students do whatever. I know that that's often the view of constructivist environments, but as a person who's taught those style classes for quite some time, I don't see it that way. In fact, I'm more tired when I get through the students doing things and learning and achieving that information kind of on their own and assimilating that information on their own, and me questioning that, than I am if I just lecture. I can do that all day. So when we look at the classroom component, we do see that this is student-centric as opposed to the teacher-centric lecture online. this is where the students are actually experiencing the reality. Whereas in the online component or in a behaviorist setting, the teacher is telling the students what reality is. They're saying, well, when you mix vinegar and baking soda, it there's a reaction and you get this foam and bubbles and everything else. And that's the reality that the teacher is telling them what happens. So the students go and say, okay, that's reality because I was told that. Whereas if we just give them the materials, what happens? And the students learn the same concept. They still learn that vinegar and baking soda create bubbles and foam. And I apologize, I'm not a chemist, but that's what it does. And we can make a volcano, and it's cool. And we can actually experience that reality. And the teacher can then say, well, why is that happening? What are the differences between those two things? And that's where the teacher becomes the facilitator, questioning reality, questioning what the students are doing. And that is the real benefit, in my eye, to the flipped classroom. So one of the reasons this first became apparent to me was a paper put out in 2013, I believe, Bishop and Verliger. And again, I'm working with Jacob Bishop out of Utah to create a better framework, both conceptually and theoretically. And he's working a little bit on this topic of the flipped classroom, because he called it a didactic paradigm, or I'm sorry, a dichotomous paradigm, where these two, behaviorism and constructivism, don't play well together in general. And there are purists of these two paradigms that say, well, no, you have to either have behaviorist or you have to have constructivist. The majority of people that have actually taught in any capacity understand that good instruction and good pedagogy is a combination of these two. Classroom behavior management, for example, even if you're in a fully constructivist environment, classroom behavior management is a behavioral method. It's reward, it's consequence. It's you do it, you get something. If you don't do it, there's a consequence. There are certainly ways to do that in a constructivist sense. I don't know how to do it. I certainly couldn't do it. I'm a very kind of authoritarian teacher. I like to have a good time, but when it's time to work, we're going to work. And if there's not work being done, there's going to be consequences. And I think that style is not uncommon in teaching. That's how I was always taught, and that's how most of my colleagues have always taught. We do have to have some behaviorist principles in that space, and the same holds true with constructivist learning. There's still reward for the students achieving something. We're still giving grades, and until that goes away, we're not going to fully rid ourselves of this behaviorist paradigm completely. So what I'm presenting is, rather than a dichotomous paradigm, is a dual paradigm, and saying, we're going to have this duality between constructivism and behaviorism, and that's what truly makes the flipped classroom a potentially powerful instructional model. Is that we're taking the best of these two things and we're cramming them together in this one method, this signature pedagogy, specifically using online technology to enhance student learning. Students do, in a sense, have to learn rote facts sometimes. And as much as I don't like the fact that some students just have to sit there and memorize times tables, that is a part of how they can progress. They do have to know those basic facts, and we can mask it however we want, and we can have them solve these problems and understand better how 3 times 3 is 9. But in the end, we just need them to know 3 times 3 is 9 to move on. And I think we can have a lot of discussion about that. But I think that there is a place for rote information. Sometimes you just need to be told because the why or the how is just too complex. If you've ever seen a proof for 1 times 1 or 1 plus 1, you'll understand how difficult it is to prove those concepts. So what I'm presenting in this paper is a new paradigm incorporating both behaviorism, and constructivism. There is a third called connectivism, but it's still kind of pouring its way into the mainstream. But I call it in the paper that this is this model in front of you is a paradigmatic duality method, and that's what I really want to get across: is that this is not one or the other. This is both, and the reason for that is going forward. If we're going to develop good research, if we're going to develop best practices, we have to have some idea of what we're looking at. And if we're not looking at it from a theoretical perspective, we are not looking at it in its entirety. And that's an important factor to move forward with. I have enjoyed this class. I've enjoyed reading the varied responses from everybody in it. I think it's been a great experience. I wish I wasn't able to attend either of the online sessions. Never been a fan of distance ed for that reason. I think it'd be great to get in a room and just kind of hash out ideas, and that's fun for me. But I have enjoyed reading everybody's reactions to my posts. I have certainly enjoyed watching and reacting to yours. If you have any feedback, whether you're officially reviewing this or not, or you have any interest in this whatsoever, please get a hold of me. I really, really do like collaborating, and I love being told I'm wrong by somebody who knows more than I do about this. So feel free to do that as well. It's been a great semester. Enjoy the summer, and I will see you on the other side.